Hey guys, Luton here. So we already know that Battlefield 5 is going to implement a load of mechanical changes and different ways of doing things. This has been shown since they did the stuff at release, and Jack actually posted a video detailing some of that information. But they've also just posted up on their website today a load more information which just goes into a little bit more detail. So I'm going to pick out a few things and we're going to go into some of that and what I think about it. First up, they talk about improving soldier movement, and the first thing they say is that the revamped soldier move is going to affect how you play in Battlefield and how things look in Battlefield. So it says in the trailer you've seen about being able to backpedal, i.e. lie on your back and move, along like that. Jumping through windows, throwing grenades back, we already have seen this in other things. Sprinting while crouching is also going to be possible. I said already, I think that's a good thing. That's going to enable people to kind of move around the map more tactically, probably. But they've also said that you're going to be able to roll and dive, and then also fire from positions you haven't been able to before. I'm curious about that, especially when it comes to the rolling, the idea of being able to roll quickly out the way and reacquire a target or so on. That could be really interesting, and that could definitely change up the flow and the dynamic of how you play, especially in, say, close quarter environments. They also then go on to talk about reacting to the world and how, say, moving through grass, the vegetation will actually move around you. Now, that is particularly curious as well, because, of course, we know that they're going to be reducing, say, the spotting markers and that kind of UI. That's something that they're headed toward in the game. So by ensuring that the surroundings and the actual vegetation, the visuals around you move, that's going to assist you in being able to identify where enemies are, which is of course going to be critical if you don't have UI telling you where they are, so that you can actually look to engage them. A small thing, but quite a nice thing, is that they state there's going to be no random bullet deviation. I think this is something that people have hated for an incredibly long time, especially when you think about suppression, and I think they want to bring suppression back, but I think the biggest criticism there was, of course, the random bullet deviation. So I think that's their kind of balancing thing there, is ensuring that there isn't any random bullet deviation. And then they talk about bullet penetration in a big way, so talking about having an LMG or stationary machine gun firing into buildings and just laying into people. Now that's a curious one, because I'm not entirely sure how that is going to play, because the idea of finding it really depends on the values of the buildings and the structures and so on that you're engaging, because it's going to be quite nice to be able to, say, pick off a sniper, or if you're, for example, close quarter in a building, moving around inside that building, and the guys, when a guy, like, maybe he runs around into a building because you had the shot on him, but he managed to just evade it. He runs into a room, flips around, and then he's just waiting for you to come in. So suddenly that situation is turned. He's then got the advantage because he's waiting for you to come around that corner. Now, sometimes you could take that guy out, sometimes not. Now, more than likely, I would imagine, if you're inside a building, you could just turn, and as he tries to run away, just keep firing, and then the rounds are going to just penetrate through probably plaster and wooden wall, and you'll be able to take that guy down, providing you keep your tracking on target. A situation that I could feel would be not so good would be, for example, seeing a couple of guys headed towards a building, and instead of actually having to get eyes on or even vaguely have any kind of accuracy, have an LMG and literally just start laying into that, and they just get shredded because they've got nowhere to hide, and essentially it kind of removes the concept of cover at all. Be silly for them to implement it where you can just literally tear through anything. I'm pretty sure there's going to be different values for, say, a wooden fence compared to a stone wall or a plaster wall, so that will probably be a factor. I mean, either way, it's got to be preferable to how it was in Hardline, where I could see a guy literally inside of a building. I knew he was there. I would fire an RPG at that building and it would just do absolutely zero. So I do like the direction they're headed in terms of that destruction, because it definitely needs to feel more fluid, and that's what goes into the next thing when they're talking about ramping up destruction. This is the biggest thing that people have wanted for a long time, is improving the destruction levels for the franchise, and I am very interested indeed to see how the destruction. So then they go on to talk about destruction, and this is probably one of the biggest things people have wanted to improve upon for the longest time in the game, because of course destruction basically is Battlefield, and what they seem to be going for in Battlefield 5 is a much more physics-based reactive destruction system, which honestly is something that I never was even sure was really going to be possible for the game, just based on performance. So the idea now really is that it just reacts in a, I guess, fairly realistic way. It seems to be a lot less about predetermined, pre-made animations and more about actually just what interacts with other things. So if you were to say push on a wall with a vehicle, it should give way in a realistic kind of way. If some kind of detonation occurs inside the building, you know, the force of the blast should push out. Even if it doesn't destroy the wall, it should deform the wall in some way. Driving a tank into a building will make it kind of crumble and deteriorate around. So that kind of change to the destruction system sounds really, really interesting. It sounds like it's a lot more specific, and that's going to be good for a few reasons. One, in terms of course, eliminating an engaging enemy, but also destruction is not just about offensive. You can also use it defensively or to escape. So you might want to, for example, like punch a hole in a wall so it gives you a new firing position, or if you're being chased, you might want to blow a hole in something again so that you can escape and run away and then turn around and re-engage your enemy from behind. So again, if they pull that off and if it works how they say, and if it, I would assume, doesn't impact on performance, that's a massive change and something which is really going to be beneficial. Next up are the fortifications, which have been briefly spoken about. Foxholes, sandbags, barbed wire, tank traps, etc, etc. You can reinforce buildings that have been destroyed. Basically, you're going to have a toolbox, you're going to be able to build fortifications. Apparently support can do this better. Again, this is something we've seen in other games, of course, like Squad, and they've clearly seen these kind of things and decided like, hey, you know, if these indie games are doing this, we need to bring that in as well, which is not a bad thing. But of course, the difference is in those games, you have the time and space and breathing room to actually think about what you're doing and properly set up a base in a kind of defensive position. In Battlefield, stuff tends to be a lot more full-on, a lot faster, a lot more, well, in their own words, chaotic. There's going to be some key things we need to know there in terms of like how long does it actually take to build this stuff? What do you need to build this stuff? How much can you build this stuff? Are there restrictions on where you can build it, etc, etc, etc. So it's going to be, again, a time situation where we just need to find out what the deal is with the fortifications. In terms of how I think it could actually impact the gameplay, it's pros and cons. I actually think that it probably would be a good thing if it was limited in where you could do it, for the reason being, if you think about a map like Metro, can you imagine Metro is bad enough just as it was? Now, can you imagine Metro, but they could also, for example, build up fortifications to blockade and make it more problematic for the attackers to kind of push through certain positions? That would have been a literal nightmare. The implementation of this fortification system, we need to know more. We need to know, is it very specific in where it can be placed? Are there limitations on, how many of these things can be down at any given time? Are there proximity issues in terms of what you can place next to one another? There's a lot of unknowns here, but the concept in and of itself, in terms of digging in or putting sandbags and other bits and pieces like this around an area, are still good, because it means it gives you more flexibility tactically. It gives you more options as players on the ground to work out, okay, we want to bunker down, we want to hold this position, and it may mean that, for example, you guys as a squad are more successful in defending a position because of those assets that go with you. So, again, just a lot of unknowns, and we really do need to just see more information. Now they talk about the revive system, and I'm kind of mixed about this really, because, for example, one change is that non-medic classes can perform revives. That's a really good thing because it just gives more flexibility, and it's going to definitely change completely the dynamic of the gameplay, because this was something which could never happen before. So it means that you guys as a squad can be more successful. It means that you don't necessarily have to have a dedicated medic, although revives by a medic are faster. One thing that I dislike intensely already, without even having seen it, is they have shoehorned in this idea of face-to-face. So when you do a physical interactions to do your reviving, you are going to turn face-to-face with your teammates. And it says no matter which end you're on, seeing the face of your buddy, blah, 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 be a cool moment. You're going to be able to revive from different angles, meaning you're putting yourself less in harm's way. The idea that the game is forcing you face-to-face, let's be real, there's no reason for that other than just the fact they want to get the aesthetics. The whole point of a lot of stuff in the game here is the aesthetics, and the facial adjustments are clearly going to be part of that. They want to make sure that that is, not something which just gets lost in the battlefield and don't care about. They want to make sure that you see that and you think, damn, that stuff looks cool. So let's not kid ourselves, that is why that is there. I personally think that, the idea of being less aware of your surroundings by being forced into that is not a good thing from a gameplay mechanical point of view, so therefore I don't like that change. Devil's advocate, it depends. They're clearly putting this stuff in because they want the aesthetics to be successful, so they can obviously make money from that, and that's one of the reasons why we're not having season passes. So conversely, it's like, okay, we don't have season passes, but we have to have this face-to-face. Which is worse? I don't know. Okay, so another thing is, of course, dragging your teammates to safety, and you can already do this in other games like Arma through modding, etc. But is this something which is going to be necessary a lot of the time in Battlefield? It really depends. I don't think it's really easy to say whether or not this is going to be something which is widely used, beneficial, how easy easy it's going to be to perform until we see mainly the flow of action in the game. If the flow of action in the game in Battlefield due to the change of mechanics is going to be a little bit slower, then this is going to be more beneficial and it's actually going to be probably worthwhile. If though it's still chaotic and just a huge adrenaline-fueled fest of speed and, you know, intense firing, then it's going to be very, very difficult, I would imagine, to actually pull that person into cover and maybe even make it worthwhile to go through that whole process. So again, not enough information, because until we see gameplay from this, it's impossible to really know how well that's going to be used and if it's going to be beneficial, it's going to be worth your time at all doing so. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is not these squad reinforcements, because it sounds a lot to me kind of like score streak. Basically, you're just building up a lot of resources as your squad, and then you get to bring in basically a streak reward, whether it's a, you know, a rocket or a tank or whatever. It's kind of a gimmick. That's their gimmick for this one, I think, really. But I want to talk mainly about these, the scarcity of war and attrition stuff. So this is a pretty interesting thing, because I think this is the core thing which will actually affect the flow and, more importantly, the pace of the gameplay. So they talk about how in previous battle games, very often it would just be a very rinse and repeat. Attack, heal up or medic up or whatever, and then move on and so on and so on. Just keep doing that rinse repeat over and over and over. And they say that the reason for this is it's very easy to get health regen and very easy to get ammunition. What they're changing in Battlefield 5 is that, say you spawn in, you can either head straight into a point by spawning in, but you might not have a lot of equipment, you might not have a lot of ammo with you, you might run out of ammo if you just spawn in and then just rush straight into the action. However, if you want to go well prepared, you're going to need to go to a control point and resupply station, get your gear together, and then head to where you want to go to, and apparently that can be built through the fortification system. So then once you start attacking a position, you're going to run down on ammo, you're going to take damage. If you survive and don't get killed, you might find yourself not at full health. You're either going to need then a medic, and then you're either going to head back to your resupply station or find a support player to give you more ammo, etc. So the idea is this scarcity puts some pressure on the players and makes them think differently about what it is they're doing. It also means that certain situations might require more time to prepare, or you might have more logistical work to do in terms of, backtracking to an area and then getting back into the fight. They also highlight that destroying enemy supply stations as well as the actual objectives you're headed for is going to be another thing to consider. So again, that's going to change things up and make your enemy think about what it is they're doing and what they need to prioritize. So you could actually be a distraction to the enemy by attacking some of their resource control areas. But here's the thing, they then go on to say that this doesn't necessarily mean it's going to make the game slower though. That's the thing which I find is a bit of a letdown, because then they say that this is high octane, fast gameplay that you know from Battlefield. It says you can still be a lone wolf, just stock up in the supply station and loot enemies. It's all up to you. That's disturbing to me. That's worrying to me, because what that suggests is they haven't gone all in. That last line there is the real kick in the balls to me, because it sounds like, hey, we wanted to implement these ideas, we have these concepts about how we want to change the gameplay, but instead of going all in and putting our cards on the table, we've kind of hedged our bets. We've watered it down, we've gone in soft. So it's anyone's guess. They could be saying that just to minimize impact against players that enjoy that kind of thing, but similarly, they could be baiting players like myself who want to see more kind of tactical, slower gameplay, and that maybe it's not going to play like that whatsoever. So that still remains to me being the biggest question about Battlefield 5, is really how is it going to play? Is it going to be this fast anarchy gameplay, or is it going to be slower, more thoughtful, more tactical? They seem to suggest that you're going to have options, you're going to have the best of both worlds. Do you think that's even possible? I'm not sure those two things go together. It's almost like oil and water. Ultimately, some nice things in here, some interesting changes, but really the biggest thing we still need to see is gameplay. Still, gameplay is the core thing for all of this stuff. I really wish that they would just put out some gameplay. As with most games, if you could just put out a little bit of gameplay and show kind of how it flows and how it's supposed to play together, that would be a massive help for us to see in the direction of how these things actually work. Because currently it's all information and you can kind of take it any way you want to. You can imagine it any way you want to. It's all fairly speculative. It tells us roughly where their thoughts are, but it doesn't actually show us how that stuff is going to connect or work together. So those are the things that I've picked up from this today. You tell me your thoughts about this down below in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you next time.